Alrighty, there it is. Credits. This game was much shorter than I was expecting. What are we at, like 20 hours right now? 20-ish hours? Before today, 25 and a half hour stream, so I guess almost 30 hours or so. I didn't write down the estimate, but all right. Lightning Returns, Final Fantasy XIII has been conquered. And my overall thoughts, probably not a surprise to anybody, but not really a fan. I can't really... I just don't know if this game, to me, is an improvement over Final Fantasy XIII 2. I guess in terms of the story department, there was no time traveling. Well, there was kind of time traveling, but like there wasn't any time traveling. And so I guess that just gives it a leg up because they got rid of that nonsense. But yeah, I don't know. This game to me just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Once again, I said this with Final Fantasy XIII too, but I don't feel like this game really progresses the original Final Fantasy XIII. I feel like it's its own thing. You know, it's trying to do its own thing. It's 13.2 basically created a whole new world, essentially, with new character, a decent chunk of new characters, and they tried to sprinkle in some old characters, and it just wasn't working out. You know, like that to me wasn't Final Fantasy 13. And then they come into 13 or Lightning Returns, and it's kind of similar to that. You know, like, sure, we get to have more interaction with the original cast and whatnot, but it's so far removed from the original game. We're not on Cocoon or whatever the other world was. We're not in a world where Lassie and Fal'Cie are roaming around, or dealing with the aftermath of that. We're dealing with something called chaos, and a god wants us to help rescue souls to save the world, I guess. It's so strange. It's a really, really strange progression in terms of story. Going from, we're going to rebel against the Fal'Cie gods, to we're going to, the timeline was somehow disrupted and we're going to repair the timeline, to I went to sleep for 500 years and a god woke me up and said, you have 13 days to save the world. You know, like, it's... What's going on? What's going on? I don't know. My overall thoughts is I really didn't like this game that much. I knew I wasn't going to like this game that much, but I ultimately just decided, you know what? I could probably just knock out Lightning Returns, and I'd never have to, you know, deal with it ever again. And yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. So it certainly could have been better. I wish they approached it in different ways, but you know, it is what it is. For the story, was it satisfying? No. I have here, I don't feel like this game is a sequel. I feel like each Final Fantasy XIII game effectively has no relation to the previous and or the game after it. they're all just different games. They just all happen to have a selection of characters that may or may not have been in the prior or the next game, you know? Like, there's so little linking them together in my eyes. Did it feel complete? I would say it felt complete. In this game, I do think that they did a good job of presenting a problem, which was, hey, the world's going to be destroyed in 13 days. Save as many people as you can. And then us basically uncovering, you know, like the secret plot of God, Gwennavelza, to essentially, I mean, honestly, from my point of view, I don't think Gwennavelza's plan was that bad. But you know, stuff and stuff. How was the pacing? I think the pacing was okay. The problem with these time limit games is you're always going to run into 3 scenarios. The most likely scenario is you're going through the game and eventually you have a section where, okay, I've done as much as I can. Now I need to wait for the time to be up so that I can move on with the story. And that's where I came about. I finished everything by day 6 or 7 and had to wait the remaining days, which, you know, destroys the pacing of the game. The second scenario is you're playing the game naturally and, you know, you're doing all that you have and you just come up to that time limit naturally, which I think is the least likely of all the options. I feel like they give you more time than you actually need. Just doing all the main story quest stuff is plenty of time to, or it gives you the maximum number of days. So there's that. And then the last option is you're playing through the game and you run out of time. You know, maybe you didn't do enough side quests or something like that. I don't know how it necessarily works, but no, I didn't feel like I did giga amounts of side quests. But you know, I still got max days from doing all the main story stuff. So that one also seems very unlikely. So when it comes to that, I feel like it's inevitable that the pacing is just going to not work out, because inevitably they give you more time than you need, because it sure would suck for you to run out of time and have to start the game all over. Which, if you think about it, it's like, what's the point of the time limit at that point? Why not just not have a time limit and let us enjoy the game for what it is? But I guess I digress slightly. Thoughts on the story? I'm confused in a lot of ways. Lightning went to sleep for 500 years because Sarah died, but that doesn't really seem like a Lightning thing to do. Yeah, they touched on this several times, and it still doesn't quite make any sense to me. I feel like Lightning is a very strong character. She established herself in the original Final Fantasy 13. She was very stoic. She was very, I don't want to say emotionless, but like, she didn't seem like the character that would essentially get bodied by her own emotions. You know, from characters dying next to her, or people important to her dying. I think that was basically shown because Sarah turned into a crystal, and it's not like Lightning was like, you know, well, let me just go sit down and go to sleep for 500 years, you know? And in in 13.2, Lightning was very much like that. She was still very, you know, stoic. She was like, I need you to help me, change the world and all this other stuff. And it didn't seem like that was an issue for her. But suddenly, they kind of like dial her back or maybe forward, I don't know. And she's not the same Lightning, I guess. Which, sure, you can change over time. Just doesn't seem like a Lightning thing to do, She was, other than that, she was exactly the same in all 3 games. So like, why change that? Lightning has also spent what feels like her entire rebellious career fighting off gods, and this time she decides to team up with one. Yeah, and then she, I guess, betrays that god, which is very on brand for her. But what would have been very interesting for this game? I thought about this yesterday. We don't spend really any time in like the thoughts of Lightning. There are moments where we get to hear her speak, but we don't get to really hear her intentions and what she wants to do. And it would have been kind of nice to be in her mind and hear her think about what options she has available to her and how she's going to overcome these challenges in front of her, and ultimately thinking about the possibility of betraying Buena Velza. I think that would have given a lot of insight to the character, who generally does not wear her emotions on her sleeve. And I think it would have got people to relate with her a little bit more, because a lot of people don't like Lightning. I think Lightning's a solid character. I don't really think there's anything to dislike from her on my end. I do think that she does have that. I keep going back to stoic and or emotionless like demeanor, but it's fine for characters to be like that. That doesn't bother me. Certainly, people like that. I'm probably like that. But yeah, I just wish we got, I guess, a little bit more out of that interaction, because essentially everything that we got plot progression wise was kind of like exposition from other characters. So for gameplay mechanics and design, would gameplay elements stand out? The time limit feels obnoxious no matter what's going on. Main story quests are gated by time, so you effectively have to waste your entire day before you can finish them. If you fail, you have to redo the entire day all over again, as well as wait until the end of the day. So this was so annoying. It could be so interesting if they allowed you to just do the side quest whenever you wanted. And, maybe it's possible, if you're like a speedrunner, you could do all the main story quests in 1 or 2 days. And that would be kind of cool. Just to go through that and be like, Buena Velza, I saved all these people in 2 days. You gave me 13. What's up? But instead, each main story quest, you have to wait until a certain time, and that time is always at the end of the day, and so you end up with like 4 to 6 hours to do the very end and beat the boss and rescue the town and stuff like that. It just gets kind of tiring. The lack of variety there. Let's see. There's a lot of downtime that can be devoted to side quests, but that often still requires just waiting around. I did run into this a couple of times. I stopped doing side quests and just started pushing the main story quest, because side quests weren't really doing all that much. But I also just wanted to beat the game, as quickly as possible, and see if I could actually beat the game as quickly as possible. I prepared, during the end portions there, just to see, and I could. So that was great. Schemata seemed like an interesting compromise to the lack of party members. I wish there were more than three, though. It feels like there aren't enough to fully realize builds, which means you have less options than the prior Final Fantasy 13 games. So this actually didn't play out the way that I thought it would. It's possible that because I didn't do side quests and I started doing a lot less exploration, I missed out on buff abilities. But the way that it played out for me is that it turns out I didn't necessarily need the third or sorry, the fourth schemata, maybe even a fifth schemata. But it is kind of weird to go through the first two games and have Ravager, Sentinel, Commando, Saboteur, Synergist, and I might be missing one. And in this game, you just like sure you can combine those into the to various um, combinations, but it does feel not great to just have less options. I will say though, since I'm here and I didn't write this down, I'm really glad they got rid of the Crystarium progression from 13.2. I thought that one was vastly inferior to the original Final Fantasy 13, and I think the schemata uh, option is superior to it. So I'm glad they did that. But yeah, let's see. The duplicate options don't need to be there. Having one piece of clothing that accounted for all elements, and you can instead swap out the locked spells for a different element. Locked abilities or different element locked abilities would have been more interesting to me. I don't know what I was trying to get. I know what I was trying to get across there. I don't know what I was trying to say. But essentially, there are schemata where it's like 10% magic, 80 plus 80 magic, and then your locked spells like fire. And then you have another schemata. It's exactly the same, except your schemata, your locked ability in the schemata is ice. And it would just been, I feel like it would have been just a better option to have one schemata and that locked ability, you could just like swap it out for ice, fire, thunder, wind, you know, whatever other stuff it might have been. And you save out on having all these duplicates because there was just a lot of duplicates. Duplicates in that regard, anyways. Not a fan of the locked abilities for schemata. Yeah, I get where they were going with this, but I would have preferred to get the schemata and then get the ability separate from the schemata that is recommended most for it, but let me be able to, combine them however I want. I do understand, though, that it's much easier to balance the schemata if you have locked abilities in there because you can disrupt certain combos and things like that. But after having played the game, that doesn't really seem like something to fear. So probably not something to worry about. I wish abilities were purchasable somewhere. I don't know if I necessarily still agree with this, but I do wish there was a way to acquire abilities that wasn't just killing enemies or doing side quests or something like that. Because a large portion of that system was combining abilities together and upgrading abilities, and that whole system just didn't it didn't feel fleshed out to me because I didn't have enough abilities. So that was like the gatekeeper there for me. I had some upgrade abilities towards the end of the game, like literally the final dungeon or whatever, and I just didn't have enough abilities. It felt weird. For combat, I'm torn on the combat because there were moments when I felt clever and powerful, but also weak and worthless. Um, yeah, this combat was very strange to me, and I'm so glad I played it on easy because I'd probably still be on like the third or fourth memory, or cast member or whatever to save. These bosses are extremely tough. Caius was extremely tough. I fought him on easy and he was kicking my butt. This final boss would have been insane. Me restarting on easy was the best decision I've ever made in any game for swapping difficulties. Um, but yeah, like there were a lot of moments where I would fight a boss and I would destroy it, and then I would fight a boss and I would struggle a ton. And that kind of wobbliness in the progression didn't work out so well for me. It was a little unfortunate, but then, like I said, I'm so glad I swapped to easy. I think it's cool you can swap between schemata freely. Yeah, I really like that this is a thing. Um, it, I don't know what I would have thought the game would have done, but it's super cool that, like, I guess there's no cooldown on it per se, even though there is a cooldown. But there's no like cooldown to swap between them, I guess is the more precise way to put it. Where I can be in the middle of an attack and I can swap to the next schemata and either queue up the next attack or maybe even cancel the attack that I'm doing and just swap it over to the next one. It's really cool that if I have a tank schemata and I'm being attacked, I can swap over to that tank schemata and maybe take a little bit less damage, uh, without having to worry about, oh, I gotta, if I'm launched up, I gotta fall back down on the floor and then I have to get up and then I have to swap. There's no like animations for it. It's just quick and snappy, and that felt really good. I wish each schemata clothing had their own unique color as opposed to three slot colors. This in turn means I wish they reduced the schemata clothing amounts. Sorry, colorblind people. So this is not I'm not talking about like the customization options where you can change the colors of the clothes, which I didn't participate in. I'm talking about there's like the first option is red, the second option is yellow, and the third option is blue for the schemata. And I wish each separate schemata clothing would change that red, yellow, or blue color. So, for example, if I had a red mage schemata, I wish maybe that one was like red. And if I had a white mage schemata, that one was white, and a black mage is black, etc. And this way, you have a locked or a fixed amount of color options. So you reduce the amount of schemata you have, but you also, make them more powerful. You combine ones that don't need to be separated. But, it does run into that colorblind issue. But it just would have been nice from my point of view because it felt, for me, it felt like I was locked in with specific styles on specific colors to help me remember what color I needed to swap to or what button I needed to swap to. And I couldn't swap those around because it just got confusing for me. That's just more of a me thing. I'm a very status quo person. The lack of overall control reminds me of the problems I had with the prior games, where you couldn't control where characters were standing. You can in Lightning Returns, but is it actually more effective than the prior games? We move so slow. So, Final Fantasy XIII introduced a cardinal sin, which was positional damage without the ability to reposition. And in that game, characters kind of run around and do their own thing, but you can't tell them where to run around. And there are many scenarios that I ran into where a boss would do an AoE attack and hit a certain percentage of my party members, but not all of my party members. And I had no control over that. In 13.2, it had the same issue, if I remember correctly. In this game, you can move around, but is it any better? Because from what I've tried, you can't move any faster. You're just kind of like you're doing like back pedal stepping. You know, it's super slow. So if you're trying to dodge some like an attack that way, you're not going to dodge that way. There is the evade ability, which does like backflips and side steps, and there are magic abilities. Well, I think most, if not all, the magic abilities. Maybe you have to like do higher rank ones. They do like backflips and things like that that I've done to avoid some damage before as well. Sometimes on purpose, sometimes not on purpose. So like those options are there, but you still can't move around freely to the point where you're able to avoid damage. And so like on a technical standpoint, it's not a cardinal sin, but the same issue is present effectively. So that one's a weird one. For dungeons, I didn't really have any comments about the dungeons. I will say that all of the areas, I felt like the areas were pretty good. They were diverse. There were different things to do. There were different characters to interact with. So I do think they did a good job with that. I also think that all the areas felt different. It was nice getting the chocobo for the big forest area where like there was so much ground to cover. It was nice in the desert area that they gave you Cactuar teleports to move around the large areas. In the city, I don't know, the Luxadar or whatever it was called. That city was kind of annoying because they closed gates at certain times. There might not be anything redeeming about that city. But the Snow City, I thought that city was kind of cool. So yeah, I think they did a good job with all the locations. For Cardinal Sins, I have escort missions written down. I don't remember any escort missions, but I'm going to believe my past self. And then like there's an asterisk cardinal sin of positional damage without the ability to reposition. You know, like you can probably sneak this one in here, but maybe not. I don't know. For miscellaneous sound and music, music was okay. It seemed like they wanted to add some older Final Fantasy 13 music with some newer Final Fantasy 13 music, and you know it worked out for me. I was mostly just jamming out to Blinded by Light or whatever, and wasn't really paying that much attention to the rest of them. For voice acting was okay. There were some characters that probably got goofed up by like the voice direction or what have you. Like Hope, for example, a lot of his lines felt stilted, which was unfortunate. But overall, I would say the voice acting was solid. Graphics were good. Replay value: does the game offer additional story content in a second playthrough to warrant playing the game again? Gotta turn on my controller. Well, there is a new game plus, but I highly doubt any of the story changes, so I'm just gonna say no. Is game worth recommending? No. Personally, I've talked to a lot of people, and it seems like most people don't like Final Fantasy 13, the original, but it seems a lot of people like 13 too, and people are generally happy with Lightning Returns. So I'm very much in the the minority here. All right, well, nothing new there. So it is kind of strange for me to be in the situation of like, yeah, I actually think Final Fantasy 13 is a great game, and I really dislike the games that come after it. It's very interesting how I differ from the masses here. Would I play the game again, whether immediately, near future, or distant future? No, not at all. For other, I have here, I was talking to my boss at work, and apparently I missed out on some 13.2 DLC that explains more of why Lightning Returns starts the way it does. So apparently there's some DLC that I guess adds more explanation of why like the time travel stuff stops and then this new thing begins. But the way that it was explained to me, that I'm conveniently not remembering what it is, it didn't seem like it really mattered all that much. Lightning Returns still starts very weirdly, and it still doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me to this day. If the developer is watching, yeah, unfortunately, this just wasn't really a game for me. This entire trilogy has just been a weird progression for me because, I mean, as I've said multiple times throughout playing the trilogy, it's like 13 was the game that I liked, and I felt like they should have doubled down on 13 or its sequel. And then, after that, sure, maybe you can switch things up or something like that. But it just it really goes in one of two ways. It's either I feel that Final Fantasy 13 should have just been one game, and these could have been separate games, spin-off games, or make the games more cohesive. I don't think there's really anything that makes these games tie together as much as I feel sequels should do. There just wasn't a whole lot for me to, I guess, latch onto and enjoy. And yeah, I guess it's just not what I wanted. This type of game. But like I said, also, it seems like I'm in the minority here. Seems like a lot of people do like 13.2 and Lightning Returns. So from that perspective, it seems like you made the right decision. So yeah, that's gonna wrap it up for me for today. Thanks for watching. Appreciate it. I'm out of here. Peace.